So that takes us to this Fox story, and we spoke about this with Brandon on Wednesday briefly about the stock drop on Wednesday, where it dropped a significant amount. The WWE stock was trading at about $109 on Tuesday. Today, Friday, it closed at $101.64. So we're looking at a $7 drop this week in the stock. LightShed Media Partners held their weekly podcast on Friday. They posted it. Brandon Ross is one of the co-hosts who has been a guest on Pollock and Thurston, and he shared this this information that he received from investors about a meeting that went down this week. And let's hear from Brandon Ross. This is from the LightShed Media podcast.
This week, there was a meeting. This is what triggered everything. There was a meeting that we got tons of calls from investors about, in which apparently the Endeavor team said that Fox was not a good partner and they don't want to renew a deal with them, and and that the 1.75 sort of like that's out there times renewal is too high. That set off a complete panic. The stock was like tanking the day after. And so now you have a situation where if Fox isn't willing to pay an increase on SmackDown, who is the bidder that is going to step in? And it isn't immediately obvious to the street who that bidder is.
So that is Brandon Ross, and that's a very interesting piece of information that, if accurate, would be Fox. No, not like they want to walk away from SmackDown, but are not looking at this 1.75x increase. And you heard Nick Khan, like they are looking for a 1.5x increase for these programs. At 1.75, that would be almost $359 million a year in average annual value. SmackDown is currently at 205, and would take, if you extrapolate over 5 years, we're talking almost 1.8 billion just for SmackDown. So these are insane numbers, but that's the game that they are playing at this point. And I mean, this is from the investors that Brandon Ross spoke to. This was the cause of the stock dropping when this started to circulate among the investment community, that Fox is not willing to hit this 1.75x figure. And maybe they're looking for like a lateral move, like we'll renew SmackDown at the current rate. WWE is not looking for the current rate. And that ties in to Nick Khan. So this meeting would have taken place on, I'm guessing, Tuesday. And then the stock drop was Wednesday. Nick Khan speaks to the Moffett-Nathanson group on Thursday, and you see how aggressive Nick Khan is in getting these new, like all of this ties in, all of this makes sense. And the urgency is seeing that stock drop on Wednesday. And they know what the reason is. We were kind of in the dark on Wednesday trying to figure this out because this had not really become a public story until this LightShed podcast today with Brandon Ross.
Very interesting. All of this very juicy stuff, that doesn't normally really take place, I think, within the professional wrestling sphere. We have, like, we're 30 minutes into the show. We have not mentioned CM Punk once, which I think in a way is very refreshing. And I'm sure we'll get there eventually at some point. But who are those other bidders? Like, 1.5 even is maybe potentially high if there's nobody else sort of in the running, but there has to be other people in the running, and who's willing to pay at least a 1.5, if not more.
Well, you brought this topic up of who would be willing to spend this. If you look at Nick Khan, it's certainly seen that he was throwing Amazon out there as a potential, which they could probably meet the dollar figure. They are going to have to overspend to convince people to come because your viewership is going to go down. SmackDown is going to do a lot less viewership on Amazon than it will on broadcast television. On top of that, the value of broadcast, in my opinion, is only growing because as cable is declining, broadcast is not dropping, obviously, because that is not affected by people cutting their cable. If you're looking, listen, if Amazon comes in and they're willing to go 1.75, if they're willing to go 2x, just throwing out ideas here, and Fox is not willing to budge, then you start to make that calculus of, okay, maybe in year one, this is like we take a big decrease in viewership, but it's a huge amount of money. And where will Amazon be by year 5? We know Amazon is not going to be out of business in 5 years. We know Amazon isn't going to be out of business in 10 years.
I would even throw out, like, is there a likelihood that they would shutter their Prime, over like OTT business within that time?
I would say no. I would say,
yeah,
with Amazon in bed with the NFL, like, this is something they are not looking at. Like, that is a growth area for them. How much growth will be there, that remains to be seen. Like, they have not kind of cut through yet, but that's their hope. And it's certainly a more stable option than like a Peacock, for instance, which, if you were to tell me in 5 years that Peacock shutters, that doesn't shock me. When they're at 22 million paid subs and they're looking at the ESPN pluses of the world that are dwarfing them, much less your Netflixes and others. So that becomes the big question now. Who are the other bidders? And is this, like, this week, Lachlan Murdoch of Fox also spoke at the Moffat-Nathanson conference, and he had two key lines, in my opinion. It was, number one, we're unlikely to be bidding for the NBA, which you would think is a good thing for WWE. He also said that they have great partnerships with WWE and NASCAR, but they have to be disciplined. So I don't know how you read that. It's going to be a push and pull. And WWE, they're looking for the most money, and Fox is looking for the best value to, I'm sure, keep this programming, but they're not going to bend over backwards and take on an enormous amount of cost to retain this, and that's the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how much of this is just posturing, publicly, so that they get the best rate?
Probably a lot. And it's, if Fox is not willing to go and WWE wants 1.75 and they can meet somewhere. But it is interesting when Nick Khan throws out like a 1.5 number publicly. Mm-hmm. Anything below that, it's like you have set your investors to have an expectation that, listen, we're looking at no less than 1.5x as sort of the barometer of a successful set of negotiations. So there you go. That is your media opening to Rewind to SmackDown, and we'll close out with just a few.
Just wanted to give another plug to your interview with Brandon Thurston this afternoon with Tony Maglio on Pollock and Thurston. That's out on the free feed right now on both Post Wrestling and WrestleNomics feeds. Fantastic interview, just talking about these topics and more. So you guys go really in depth with Tony Maglio, and I continue to love these interviews that you and Brandon do on Pollock and Thurston. I think they're some of the most in depth in our space. So
Tony was covering all the upfront presentations in New York this week, and he's very well versed in professional wrestling as well. So it was kind of great to pick his brain about a lot of these topics. So if you enjoy this discussion, you'll like that interview as well as the one with Richard Deitch last week, which I got quite a bit of feedback towards. So you can check out those if you want to have a sample of some of the interviews Brandon and I have been doing. Moving on, just back to the television rights, Nick Khan this really did feel as we are fielding offers and we are trying to attract bidders, because you would, if they're out of this exclusive negotiating window, now is the open house. Now is when we want to drive up our price of the incumbents and see if there are any viable options out there. And he flat out stated,